Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 1, Episode 12, 5 Ways to Turn Your SDRs into AEs Before They're Up for a Promotion. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you do me a favor and go to flipthescript.co and make sure you download the deck so you can follow along. But other than that, let's jump into the content. So why don't we start with an agenda? There are going to be 3 different pieces to today's agenda. If you thought you were just getting one piece, you are in luck. The first piece I wanted to cover from a high level, the 5 ways you can turn your SDRs into AEs. And then parts 2 and 3 need a little bit more detail. So we're going to go through details of one of the pieces, ways you can turn an SDR into AE with bi-weekly product webinar. Then we're going to finish off with my favorite topic in sales of all time. I'm putting that on record, is KPI systems. So let's go ahead and dig in. 5 ways to turn your SDRs into AEs. I don't know if I'm showing up too quickly here, but these are the 5 ways that I'm turning my SDRs into AEs before they're asking for a promotion or before they are up for promotion. So the first way is one of my favorite ways is having them send out personalized messaging. So whenever people are prospecting, I would argue this is a good idea no matter what, unless you're selling B2C. But personalized messaging is a way for people to know their prospects beforehand, right? And communicate that to their prospect beforehand, that they know who they are, so that it's reasonable for your prospect to think that you would be able to add value and relevant value because you have done your research. So as an account executive, when I was selling, it was interesting to me because I always sent out personalized messaging. You know, every email is very, very unique to the use case every time, you know, whether you're at negotiation stage or red line stage or, you know, even the nascent stages of the sales conversation where you want to say everything based on what happened in the conversation before. Every single piece of messaging along the way was always very unique to the person that I was sending it to. Transition a few years later, whenever I became an SDR and took a quote unquote step back, you know, to understand the tech ecosystem. When I was an SDR, all of a sudden I was given a sales engagement tool and saw that a lot of my peers were sending out tons of messages, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 messages at a time, you know, to try and get the results that they wanted. And so at this point, you know, it's all a template game, right? You're sending prospecting emails, maybe you're jamming at 200 to a certain buyer persona and basing it all on, you know, the sales enablement buyer persona or the CIO buyer persona and trying to think about what resonates with them. Then as an account executive, you're always doing very unique messaging. So a great way to kind of start that train and that train of thought and train them to be able to really interact with their prospects in a more meaningful manner is to, even in the prospecting angle, even when they're trying to set up appointments, to have them make it personalized. So, I mean, being an account executive, it's a very, very dynamic role. You have to do there's a lot of different moving pieces to the puzzle. You have to send very unique messages in very, very unique situations at very specific times. And so a good way to get their brain thinking about that is by, even within the prospecting motion, getting them to send out personalized emails. So also from a tip standpoint, this will usually cause more conversion for them, even if they're just booking the demo. So it helps them in their core function, helps train them how to interact with someone in a more meaningful way. You know, becoming an account executive, it's not all about just getting the first meeting. It's about, was the meeting meaningful? You know, did the meeting go well? Did you ask the right questions? Did you build rapport? Did you set yourself up for success on the back end and your CS team? And so SDRs need to learn how to have that conversation with their prospects, even though it's awkward for them in the beginning because they haven't done it. They've sent an email, got a meeting, and pass it along. So this is a good way to do that. Second way that you can get your SDRs to be prepared to become an AE is by listening to their calls. So using a conversation intelligence software like Chorus, for instance, you can break down AE calls and listen to them and say like, okay, I want to listen to all of the closing calls on the back end. So instead of having to shadow, typically reps in the past, whenever they join an organization, would have to do what's called shadowing, where they sit in with the rep and they listen live with the rep to what the prospect's saying. Good in theory, but makes it super awkward for your prospect and doesn't give you an aggregate. If you get your SDRs to listen to AE calls in general, and I go into in another session, the 7 types of calls that they can listen to become an AE, and the different semantics and details for each one of those calls. But if you get them to listen to these calls in aggregate, you get them very used to the demo flow. So For instance, when I'm filming here, the crew here knows that I have these certain amount of mannerisms. And the reason they know that is because they have shot several different videos and they can see what's parallel and what the places that I typically mess up and the places where I typically nail it, which is very, very few, by the way. And they know that because they've shot a lot of videos of me. So getting your SDRs to listen to a lot of different calls for the account executives can help give them a flavor of, by and large, usually when someone brings up this objection, this is the direction you're going to go. Or I'm going to start off a demo by, leading with this portion. So it's a great way for them to really become an AE by way of, putting themselves in the shoes of an account executive currently by listening to what's going on in the demos, pricing negotiation, etc. The third and most often used that I see is way to turn your SDRs into AE is training them. So a great couple of tips to train them. I mean, you can bring in third-party trainers, like myself. I like how I'm not selling myself. I'm like, don't bring me in. But you can bring in a third-party trainer to train them of how to become an AE. But really, I think in-house can be very, very helpful to even supplement with a third-party trainer of like, what's the product knowledge that they need to know? What do they need to know about demo instances? How can I teach my SDRs how to handle a pricing conversation? Or how do I teach them to handle the things that they don't typically run into as an SDR that they will as an AE? So, whether that's sales cycle or different segments that they're hunting into or how your product specifically fits in with different industries, I think a very in-depth training and knowledge of your product is necessary. So, we want to prevent, in any case scenario, an AE or the best AEs that I know don't talk about their product much and want to know much, much more about the prospect. They want to know what's going on with them, what matters to them, and then supplement the product on the back end. But I think that does not relinquish your need to know your product. So product training, any kind of sales cycle training, how to handle pricing, et cetera, can be really helpful so that when the SDR does go into the account executive role, they don't have the experience of doing it live, but they know how to do it in theory in their mind. And then the last two is having them run a biweekly product webinar. We can get into the details of what that is. And then you can also turn them into an AE by the right KPI system. So let's dig in a little bit deeper to points 4 and 5. The biweekly product webinar is basically a tool that I use to for people who inbound demo requests. They request a demo and they want to get to know my tool or they want to get to know my platform. If they're unqualified, meaning let's say they don't have enough people within their organization, they aren't the right role that you typically sell into, they don't have the right technographic setup. Instead of taking these leads and saying like, you're not good enough to get a demo from our product, you can surface all of those unqualified leads into a webinar that you do every other week, where you basically do a demo high level so that all the prospects who came through on that line, could be, it depends on the size company and how the demo request line is going, it can be anywhere up to 100 people that want to show up that you want to help get to know your product in case they might buy one day, but they probably can't buy today because they don't have, the budget or the technographic setup. So it's really helpful to your prospects to get to know, even when they're unqualified. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be unqualified. Helps them get to know your product, but it also can help train an SDR of how to pitch a demo. So if you're going to have there is a very, very big difference between learning something and actually doing it. So if I, gave you a video on me riding a horse and me breaking down how to ride that horse and then said, hey, jump on a horse and do exactly what I did, do you think you'd be able to do it? The answer is yes, you're a savant. The answer is you'd probably struggle with it, then, you're more like the rest of humanity that I've seen. So typically doing something and learning how to do something, from a theory perspective are very, very different things. And so you want your SDRs to be able to go ahead and pitch the demo whenever their heart, is beating and whenever the pressure's on. And so one way that people have done that is they have done mock demos. They've said like, okay, I'm going to pretend like I'm the prospect internally. Maybe I'm a sales enablement person. And I say like, I'm going to pretend like I'm a sales leader and you're pitching into me. And most sales leaders that I talk to say the mock demo is nothing like the real thing. And that's usually the truth, right? Sometimes the sales enablement person will be too hard on them or too easy on them, or, come up with scenarios that isn't covering all the scenarios that will come up as an account executive. So there's nothing better than learning by experience. So we want to prep them with theory and prep them with practice and mock demos. But then it's also really nice if they had the chance to deploy a demo and figure out what their demo style is beforehand. So how you can do that is by basically putting them on that biweekly product webinar. So this is a pool of unqualified leads. So you're not really, quote unquote, risking anything, because these are people who couldn't really buy your product anyway. But it's a great way for your SDR to learn. So the who, what, outcome, and contract training are on the slide. So I hope that you've downloaded the deck. But basically, this is a senior SDR who is aspiring to becoming an account executive. They give a basic demo. I would have them pull a list of who's attending that demo beforehand, and then base the demo on the buyer persona that's the most prevalent, the most prevalent within the demo. But it gives them an opportunity to go ahead and give a demo to real prospects who might one day want to buy your product without the risk of, quote unquote, screwing up a really high value lead. So, the outcome at the end of the demo, they can even ask the pool of the pool of unqualified leads, hey, if anyone wants pricing, if anyone wants to buy our product, meaning now that you've seen it, reach out to me at this email address, and you might surface a couple of different leads out of that pool. So on the back end, you can even train the SDR of how to handle contracts and assemble contracts for pricing. All of this is a really great way to turn your SDR into an AE, because it gives them experience of doing it live whenever the pressure's on and their heart is thumping. But you also don't run the risk of, pitching a demo on someone who is really, really hyper qualified with an SDR who hasn't done it before. So now let's cover KPI system. This is the last thing that you can do to turn your SDR into an AE beforehand. Arguably the most important. KPI systems should measure, from my perspective, how lucrative a deal is, because this helps an SDR value what an account executive values. An account executive typically will value one of two things. Someone who has a great title, one of three things. Someone who has a great title, someone who has a great opportunity in terms of size of the total sale, or someone who has extremely high buyer intent, meaning it's an easy close. So when I was an account executive, if I saw the vice president of a company, I'm like, oh, this is a great lead because their title is really great. So they're probably the decision maker. So that's going to make this deal easier. Or if I saw a deal that was, let's say IBM, and it's, 10 billion people, then I'm like, this is a great deal because IBM, is a great company. There's a lot of different employees. So probably the contract value is going to be super high. Or the third thing is, the buyer intent super high. So when I was an AE, if I saw a lead come in the door and I'm like, okay, I need to sneeze in this lead's direction and it's going to close, that would make it super high value to me. So you want to get your SDRs thinking in the mindset of what an account executive values. So instead of basing them on influence ACV, because then they're tied to how an account executive, their ability to close. And if they get a great AE, they look better, and worse AE, they look, bad, not so great. You want to basically measure them from a comp, income, and KPI perspective on those variables that I just mentioned. So again, we're talking about the ICT or the title of someone in a room. Are they, higher or lower up the chain? And also how lucrative would the deal have been if we were able to close it? So instead of estimating what a deal could be, for instance, I base this off of Outreach, who's a sales engagement platform. So they sell based on seat size. And I imagine that they sell to, they want to sell to people who are usually a manager level and above. So instead of this first one is going to be for outbound reps. Instead of comping my SDRs just on meeting count, you want to comp them on quality. So the two things that I mean by quality is, number one, on the x-axis here, you'll notice that it's an indicator of the potential deal size. So for Outreach, for instance, you could break it up into 3 brackets. We have 10 to 50 reps, 50 to 200 reps, and then 200 plus. So you can define whatever these are for your company. Let's say they are, 100 to 300 reps or 300 to 1,000, or maybe you go on employee size and you say my bands are, 100 to 800, 800 to 1,000 and 1,000 plus. It doesn't matter to me necessarily, where those bands are, just as long as you have 3 brackets and you're basing them on how lucrative the deal would be if it did close. So then you remove the bias of, if the AE can close it or not, and remove that impact, but you still get the juice from the squeeze, if I'm making any sense. So 10 to 50 reps, 50 to 200, and 200 plus in this case are the bands. And then on the y-axis, I am basically putting in the level of the title of hierarchy in the room. So a quick kind of chart on hierarchy, it usually goes, individual contributor, and then team lead, manager, senior manager, director, senior director, head of, AVP, RVP, VP, SVP, EVP, and then CXO, and then queen of the world is usually the level. So it doesn't matter what your respective discipline is. It doesn't matter if it's sales enablement versus sales operations versus marketing versus demand gen versus, security. All that matters really is what is their level of title, because it gives you an indication of within their respective discipline, how far or low up are they on the chain. So for here, I put manager, senior manager, director, senior director, head of, VP, and CXO. And the great thing about comping like this and KPIing like this is once you break it out like this, you will find out the data on actually, I thought directors would close a little bit better, but frontline managers did. So there's a lot of theories when it comes to our sellers of what closes, best, whether that's a certain respective discipline or role or company size. But I love, as always, as all leaders want to do, let the data do the talking. So I'd be very interested from the leadership perspective of, I think that vice presidents at 50 to 200 is our sweet spot, but let's let the data do the talking, and it'll communicate back to me for the go-to-market strategy. Where are the best places for my reps to hunt? What has the quickest sales cycle and conversion ratios, so I can really re-gear my go-to-market strategy based on the KPI system that I had with the SDRs. So you want to put associative points for each one of these and rank a little bit higher, manager, director, head of. And again, these are just examples. So I put 1 for manager, 1.5 for director, and then 2 for head of. And then as they head up market, you guessed it, the more lucrative the deal, the more points that I'm going to give them. So I implemented this system at several different teams. And overnight, instead of hunting a manager, at a SMB company, let's say, overnight, they realized that they were getting 1 point for a manager for 10 to 50 reps, and then 3 points for a vice president at a mid-market company for 50 to 200 reps. So instead of begging them to hunt a certain person, instead of asking them to hunt director level or vice president level, because, that's what really matters to our organization, the quickest way to drive behavioral change is to tie someone's wallet to it. So I have 1, 2, 3, 1.5, 2.5, and 3.5, 2, 3, and 4. And again, you can mess with all of these different variables as long as the structure is still the same. But you want to get them thinking in terms of, not only am I thinking about volume of meetings and how many appointments did I set, but I'm breaking down in my mind as early as an SDR role of how valuable was this meeting, because you're tying it to how valuable the associative deal is. So when they become an account executive, instead of just valuing an appointment, it being a manager at an SMB company, they really start to salivate, or their ears start to perk up when we're talking about a vice president at enterprises, 200 reps plus. So this is a great KPI system for a team that has not been segmented yet. So for SMB companies or mid-market companies, maybe you're just getting your SDR program right off the floor. It's a little too complex to segment right off the bat. So maybe you just hired 3 or 4 SDRs and you're saying like, I don't want to limit them to segment. That's something that's a little bit too advanced right now. Right now, I just want SDRs to be calling on all of my accounts, whether they're with an ABM or they hit my qualifying criterion. So this is a great way to segment them, or a great way to comp them if you haven't segmented, because you have the employee bands again here up top. If you have segmented your team already, let's say that you have a enterprise team, general business, mid-market, SMB, et cetera, but you've basically busted up your team in terms of they are hunting on certain accounts within an employee band or whatever matters to you, however you define SMB, mid-market, or enterprise, then this is a good updated system of how you can do that and how you can gear your SDR's mindset to be thinking AEs like AEs in the process. So I've listed here the 3 typical types of bands that I've seen: SMB, mid-market, and enterprise, sometimes even see strategic on the back end. But basically, the entire comp system stays the same in terms of it's a point for a manager, regardless of if you're hunting SMB, mid-market, or enterprise. It is a 1.5 for director or senior director, and it is 2 points for head of, VP, or CXO. So instead of comping for bigger size deals because they have to stay within segment, I just raise and lower the quotas for the associative band. So enterprise, of course, you're going to need it's harder for an SDR to hunt enterprise, or at least in my experience, it surely is. Because of just the complexity of the deal. And so typically I see companies saying anywhere from 12 to 15, I've seen on the low end of 6, 8, 10 meetings for enterprise, but basically you get the point. The lower amount of meetings for enterprise, so I put 12 for a junior rep in this instance, 15 for a senior rep on outbound only. And then you get bigger quota if you move down market. So not only is it much easier to hunt SMB and mid-market than it is enterprise, but you also, from a comp perspective, I can't pay a BDR the same amount of money, for the same amount of meetings within each of these deals, because an SMB deal typically is going to have a much lower ACV. So I put 20 here and 23 for junior and senior, 15 and 18 for mid-market, and then 12 and 15 for enterprise. But in all case scenarios, 1, 1.5, and 2 based on the chain. And you can change these titles out. Maybe you want to do director is the lowest title that you'll go. So you'll go director, head of, and VP, or director, VP and CXO. You can really change those bands just as long as the structure stays the same. One more KPI system, because I'm just having so much fun. I hope you are too. And then we will end the session. So Allbound is another place where really your reps are in control of who they hunt, and where you can really gear their mindset to, is this deal lucrative or is it not, based on the SDR function that will help them transition to becoming an AE. So an all-bound KPI system that I usually pitch that has really done wonders for me is, if you are doing all-bound, let's say you have only 1 rep at your company or 3 reps at your company and you want them to be calling on inbound and outbound both, you can comp them by doing this. Set a quota, for example, let's say 15 points for argument's sake today. Number 2, every inbound meeting that they process is a subtraction of a certain fraction of a point. So one that has worked really well for me is 0.2. The reason being, an inbound meeting is much easier to book than an outbound meeting, even if the deals are exactly as lucrative. So I've heard a lot of people comp inbound reps based on meeting count or how lucrative the deal was. Good in theory, but they didn't affect who inbounded, right? So it's no marker of their skill. Whereas outbound, they did affect who they outbounded. They can be very strategic. A lot of effort went into it. And so essentially for inbound, you want to make sure that your SDR processes them as quickly as possible, but you do not want to pay them out for how much that deal was worth because they didn't influence it. You do, however, need to make some kind of subtraction to their point total because it takes time to take care of an inbound lead. So you want to give them some kind of motivation or some kind of incentive to basically get the lead into a meeting so that they don't just not pay attention to inbound because they don't get their points that way. So I typically do 15 points. Let's say 15 points is the quota for the outbound rep. You do a subtraction for 0.2 every single time that they process an inbound lead. So let's say, for argument's sake, I think I put in here, so they booked a total of 10 inbound demos. So for the month, they booked 10 inbound demos. So total, that would be a subtraction of 2 points. You put a minimum floor of how low they can limit their quota. For outbound reps, you want them to keep the heat on outbound for 3 reasons. Number 1, that is something that will grow their skill set. When you're talking about becoming an account executive, it's all about hunting on outbound and putting your own destiny into your own court. And so you want to get their skill set sharp of hunting outbound. Number 2, outbound, you can control the leads, right? So you want to get the SDRs focused on the leads that you find lucrative as a company. So inbound, you just want to qualify it and see, if it's something that you want to work with, someone you want to work with. Outbound, you can be much more strategic. So I usually relate this to whenever you're dating. If you go into a bar, guy walks up to me at a bar and says, "Hey, how are you doing?" The first 5 things that I'm thinking is like, "I'm great, but I'm going to qualify you." True story. What do you do? Who are you? What's your relationship look like with your mom and dad? Like, what are you looking for here? But I'm asking all of these qualification questions because this is a fish that has jumped into my boat. So I'm simply here to, metaphorically, not with the bar instance, get the fish and figure out if I can eat this fish. In the latter perspective, from an outbound perspective, this is me identifying Jude Law in the market and saying, like, I want to go outbound for Jude Law because that's a strategic deal. And that, is someone that I want to go after, right? So you can be much more selective in who you're going after. So in point number 3, whenever you're putting a minimum floor on this bar, you want to make sure that your reps have the hunger in their, belly to really go after outbound because it helps them get better in their skill set. You can really dictate and control the destiny for your company of the accounts that you're hunting. And it really puts a good infrastructure in terms of comp system of what was the general skill and effectiveness of the rep. The 4th thing that you can do is, once you subtract out the inbound total, so let's say, again, for argument's sake, that it was a 15-point total for the rep. They transitioned or they set 10 demos from inbound. So it's a subtraction of 2 points, which gives them a 13-point delta. That new 13 points is their quota for the month. And they have to hit that on outbound only. So in any case scenario, regardless of how many inbound demo requests I am transitioning, I have the need and the hunger to hunt on outbound. So if I set 0 demos for the month, on outbound, 0 of 6 is the same as 0 of 8. So even if they transition in these inbound demo requests and take care of them and get them on the calendar, they're still incentivized, thinking about, dreaming about, and hunting outbound. So you want your reps, you want to get the most squeeze out of them as you can. So you always want to give them that outbound quota and basically say, take the point total, subtract out the points for the inbound that they converted, and then they have a new total, but that is the percentage quota attainment is based off of that total versus outbound points only. So how it can turn your SDR into an AE is basically on that new outbound total on the back end. You can gear that just like you did for your outbound total. So you give them 1 point total for manager, 1.5 for director, and 2 points for VP. But you get the gist that even with an all-bound rep, they have an outbound quota that they have to hit. And so you can get them thinking like an account executive because, again, they're looking at how lucrative the deal is in terms of title and in terms of deal size. So it gets them salivating for the right reasons and hunting just like an account executive does. So whenever they make that transition, they are really excited about a VP of sales at Oracle over someone who is maybe a frontline manager at an SMB company, because it hypothetically, if it were to close, means a lot more money to them. So that's everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. If you like this session and want to know 5 ways to make me happier, go to flipthescript.co and you can download a lot more sessions on different sales topics. And the last way is if you go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn and give us a follow in your top 2 takeaways so I can know what you liked about the session. Hope you have a great rest of your day.